What I found really interesting is that the doctors would say to me what we often say a lot to a lot of folks when we're doing somatic work: it depends. We got to see, there's all these other factors we got to take it. There really is just so much watching and waiting, seeing how
Mhm.
her body responds and then responding to her body. So in a way, I could kind of relate to it. I could kind of relate to what the doctors are doing, because that's what we do in somatic work. We listen to the body, we watch the
Mhm.
body, and then we respond to it.
Welcome to the Holistic Life Navigation Podcast, where we explore life through the lens of somatics. I'm Luis Mujica, a somatic educator who teaches people how to find safety in themselves. Your turn to learn begins now. Okay, welcome, my friend. Yeah, I don't even know if I need to welcome you because this is your podcast, it feels like, too, at this point. I have Camille with me today, and we wanted to have just kind of an open flowing conversation about her journey with Khadija, her sweet little daughter, who came into the world in a very unique way and has, you've been on quite a ride. So, we had a podcast about a little bit about this before, everything you went through.
Mhm.
I think one thing I was curious about going into is something you've brought up several times. Um, Actually, why don't you, for people that are just tuning in, give us just a reframe?
Yeah. So last time I shared with everyone I was pregnant, and we had found out that baby had a heart condition as well as a high likelihood for having Down syndrome. So a couple of months ago, gave birth to baby girl, named her Khadija Eve. And yes, she had her heart condition and she also has Down syndrome. Um, Came home for the first 3 weeks. Things were going fine. But then she did have to be readmitted to the NICU because she was starting to have issues with eating, putting on weight, basically signals that she was going into heart failure fairly early. We knew she was going to have an open heart surgery at some point, maybe around 6 months old, but actually we had to end up having an open heart surgery when she was around 5 weeks old to help bridge her to that full repair. And there are a lot of things that happened in between, her being born and coming to that decision. So I'll pause there because I know that's even a lot.
Yeah, well, what was it like? I guess what I'm wondering is if you go back a little bit, because this is such a real time case study for you, for me, with the work that we teach and we practice of, how deep can we apply these methods to situations in life? Because we have these ideas of, I have to say, it's very interesting. Um, as a teacher, I find that I'm given situations that other people aren't given, throughout my life to literally overcome so that I can teach and serve people. It's just part of, it feels like my karma. I see
Mhm.
that for you too, I'm assuming.
Yes.
And you've said so many times in spaces with me that people would say, you children should never die before you. And your mind would always go, why not?
Hmm.
And so it's interesting that you've been playing for a long time with possibilities of things going completely awry as a mother in particular, and now it actually happened, and you're lived. I would say you lived through it, because right now it's not happening.
Yes.
But tell us just what was it like, first of all? And those of you listening, if I'm not making sense, I'm going to be more specific. 'Cause I'm just talking to you, but I'll pretend I'm talking to everybody else for a minute. So Camille and I will often talk about these fears we have, as human beings, these typical fears of, like, my kids dying before me, or my partner dying, or me getting sick, or losing all my money. And we have these ideas of things shouldn't happen. And it's part of what I call like a human centric, or even a human supremacist kind of
Hmm.
way of living, where we think everything revolves around us and our society, but we're just a piece of this gorgeous, puzzle of life, which means we're just as vulnerable to death as anything else at any moment. So Camille has a practice very similar to mine, where we literally imagine horrible things happening, so our body can actually not even prepare for it, but see what it rattles, what it shakes in us, and how open our ego can be, how flexible it can be to being okay with these things. So you've said things like, I've imagined my sons being
Hmm.
killed, and I feel the grief, I feel the mourning, I feel the terror, and I know I'm going to be okay. So you would say these things for the last, 2 years in spaces with us, and then there you are, in the NICU with Khadija, and tell us what happens.
Yeah. So, for many people, I'm sure, who've been through medical issues, there's always this start and stop, hurry up and wait. And so that was also really dysregulating for me, for a particular person who likes to get into a rhythm and a flow. So even just trying to get into really the unknowing, that literally I'm taking it day by day, hour by hour, because one moment we're at home, next moment we're admitted to the NICU. We're going to resolve this using non-surgical means. Oh, we've decided you have to have surgery and we got to ship you off to another hospital 2 hours away. Get to that hospital. No, we don't think you need surgery. We're going to go back to try to do this without surgical means. Do that for a few days. No, we are going to have surgery. So it's all this back and forth, back and forth. So first, I really just had to get settled with not knowing.
What does that feel like? Like when you take us there in your body, what is it like to not know and get settled in not knowing?
Not knowing for me meant being incredibly, incredibly present in every moment, which can be difficult, like I said, in general, for someone who likes to plan or be in a flow. But I think particularly when you're encountering medical issues, you take one thing and extrapolate. Oh, this happened, so that means XYZ is going to happen. Or the question is, when will we know? When are we going to get it out? When is this going to happen? And what I found really interesting is that the doctors would say to me, what we often say a lot to a lot of folks when we're doing somatic work, it depends. We got to see, there's all these other factors. We got to take it. There really is just so much watching and waiting, seeing how her body responds and then responding to her body. So in a way, I could kind of relate to it. I could kind of relate to what the doctors are doing, because that's what we do in somatic work. We listen to the body, we watch the body, and then we respond to it. So yeah, that was the first thing that really supported me, and I had to do was just be hyper present in the moment, taking it day by day, sometimes hour by hour.
Can you take us to this moment for everyone's listening, thinking, okay, here you are in the hospital, you don't know what's going to happen. There's back and forth. You get oriented. Okay, in a couple of days we're doing surgery. The day comes. Actually, we're not going to do it. Go back home, and then oh no, come back. We're going to do it. So you're going through that. Freeze a frame for us. Like literally, bring us into the hospital with you. Like where are you? What's happening as you're practicing somatic presence? Like tell us exactly what. One moment you can pick out.
Yeah. I'll give you one of when they changed the date of the surgery. So we've gone through all the rigmarole of whether we are or aren't going to have surgery. We've decided and we picked the date. We get her all ready. There's some prep work you have to do prior to having surgery. So she couldn't eat for like the 3 or 4 hours prior to surgery. They got her clean, all that stuff. Literally like 15 minutes or so before we're going to roll her into pre-op, the surgeon comes in and says, we're going to have to move you to tomorrow. And in my body, as he says this, I can feel the activation swell up in me, because I had been preparing my body that, okay, today is the day we're going to have surgery. And now all this activation that had really been in my body and was kind of, I guess, flowing and preparing to move, now just felt so stifled. And so what I did in that moment was first orient to the fact that, okay, I'm noticing this activation coming up in my body. I had witnessed many parents lash out at some of the doctors and nurses because they were dealing with a lot of charge in their body. So I was really cognizant that that could have been something that my body experienced. But I chose to notice that, okay, my torso is getting really, really warm right now. But I was sitting down and I felt really supported by the chair. My hips and my legs weren't that activated. So I took a moment just to breathe into them as the doctors sort of explained to me again why the surgery just has to be late 24 hours. And so I took it in. And then when he left, I excused myself. Khadija was with the nurse. I went to the bathroom and just took a moment to go back to my torso where all the activation and warmth was, and just took a couple of breaths in it. And some tears wanted to come out. And then that was all that my body needed to sort of regulate itself, that activation was able to come out in tears. And then as that activation came out in tears, I could feel the activation in my torso dissipate. And then I just, again, went back to my lower body and wasn't noticing as big of a distinction between my lower body and my upper body. But then I asked myself, what have we gained in delaying this by 24 hours? And what immediately came up to me was, oh, I get 24 hours to snuggle with her. Because when she comes out of surgery, her chest was going to be really tender, so she was going to and be hooked up to all these things, and so I wasn't going to be able to hold her. But I had another 24 hours just to hold her, and so that's what I chose to attune to.
Oof, that is so beautiful. We have to, I'm noticing as you speak, I want to use this whole, interview as we're talking about this. I want to be like pausing and then extracting the
Yeah,
practices, right? So let's start with this piece of choosing what to attune to. Now, what's the difference? Tell everyone listening, what's the difference between choosing what to attune to and bypassing or denial or toxic positivity? In
yeah.
this example, with Khadija having 24 more hours with her.
Absolutely. So for me, bypassing or toxic positivity would have been ignoring the fact that I was experiencing frustration, ignoring the fact that my body was now had geared up, had prepared it. My body, I had prepared her body. The fact is, we are going to have to do this all over again. She was going to have to pause eating for 4 hours, and that makes her a little fussy. All these things. This is true. This is a reality. That is frustrating and it is inconvenient. I can acknowledge that. And that is valid. And I can also notice, what did I gain in this delay? So there is the inconvenience of the delay. And there is also the reality that I get 24 more hours to cuddle and snuggle with her. Because the reality is, she has a heart condition. At that point, she was only 5 weeks old. I don't know if she's going to make it out of that surgery. And then, like I'm saying, even if she does, there's going to be a period of time where I'm not going to be able to touch her or hold her like I'm used to. So how about I take these 24 hours as a gift? I get another 24 hours, knowing that she's going to go into surgery tomorrow, just to snuggle with her.
This is such a beautiful example because it's how I teach the bypassing bit and the denial bit.
Mhm.
If you were attuning to the fact that it was lost, like the date change, if that's all you were attuning to, you were actually orienting to the past in that moment.
Mhm.
Right. So let's say it's 12 p.m. The doctor says it's not happening today. Activation, tears. Now, let's say it's 1 p.m. If you're still attuning to it's not happening today, you're actually looking back at 12 p.m. So you're bypassing 1 p.m. Like what's happening right now,
Yes,
1 p.m. And I
exactly.
think we see that we when we think about attuning to what's right here, what's a gift, not even positive or negative, but just what's here, what's the reality. When we attune to that, we can think consciously, not, I shouldn't say consciously, reflexively, we can think, but that's still bypassing the fact that you lost something. And it's like, but
Mhm.
the lost is in the past. What's right here?
Yes.
And that's how I remember we had a beautiful session in membership last year around grief.
Mhm.
And we got to hear people say, okay, what did I lose? And feel that. And what was gained after the loss and feel that and be with both. So you cried and you held space for the part of yourself that grieved losing that moment you were waiting for. Like, this is the day I'm ready. And then simultaneously, you felt the part that said, and I get to cuddle her for another 24 hours. And
Yes.
how did that cuddling her for 24 hours, how did that increase your capacity for them the next day?
It was interesting because I didn't feel like I had as much charge the next day when she was actually going to her surgery. We had kind of done the things before. I knew what the prep was going to look like. Um, I I felt softer going into the surgery than I did the previous day. And it may have been like just because like I knew like for certain, as certain as I can be that, oh,
Yeah.
it's definitely happening today. Um, but yeah, I just remember feeling softer going into
Hmm.
it than I did the previous day.
So
And
then,
oh,
yeah, go
oh no,
ahead.
I was just going to say that the what we were talking about in terms of being present, tuning to the now, rather than the loss, has been incredibly supportive for me my entire time in the NICU. There are so many parents who are in the NICU who are in the hospital, and all they're attuning to is, when am I going to get out of here?
Yes.
And if I was attuning to that, I would have been exhausted and depleted.
Well, because
If
fast forward, what, 6 weeks? How long were you in
Yeah,
there?
we ended up being there 7 weeks total.
7 weeks,
So if
right?
every day I was just like, so when are we leaving? When are we leaving? Like I can even feel it now. That was just been exhausting to my body.
Yes.
What people found really interesting prior to her surgery, folks would call me like, "Oh, how are you doing? You're away from your sons, your husband, you're up there, you're living in the hospital. It must be horrible." I'm like, actually, it's not so bad. I mean, I have 24-hour childcare. I can literally leave, take a nap, go eat anytime I want to. I never had that with my other two children. I had the ability to just be with her as well.
Mm,
There was nothing else I
mm.
had to do. I love my sons. They're amazing. But there's a difference between
Yeah,
being in space with her and them, a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old boy,
that's
versus
right.
me having the opportunity just to be in a room with her. It's a different energy, it's a different vibe. So as I was attuning to those two things, I have help and I get time just to be with her. Those first few weeks actually weren't that bad. And I remember people were like, "What?" Yeah, it's kind of gives me a chance to rest. Yeah.
We want you to suffer, Camille. Why
Yeah.
aren't you suffering? It's interesting because when you were there, I was thinking that I was putting myself in your position in my body, and I was imagining, oh, this is actually kind of nice. Like I have all this childcare. I'm right here with the specialist if something goes wrong. I can go eat some food. I can go take a nap. Like there's nothing I have to be doing. I'm just being supported. So 7 weeks of support is really what you were experiencing.
Yeah.
And if you were tuning to leaving, 7 weeks of support would have been completely missed by your body, right?
Completely missed. I wouldn't have gotten that rest.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
powerful. That's powerful. So the surgery happens.
Mhm.
Now take us to the next chunk.
Yeah. So Khadija goes into surgery. Surgery is fine. I meet her in recovery. Um, about 48 hours into recovery, she experiences internal bleeding and she goes into cardiac arrest. And I was in the room when she went into cardiac arrest. So I then watched nurses and doctors perform CPR and resuscitate her for 30 minutes. They were able to resuscitate her after 30 minutes, but she had to be put on a heart bypass machine as well as intubated because she wasn't able to breathe on her own and her heart wasn't able to beat on its own.
Let's pause here a minute. As you're telling me this, is your body doing anything? Like what's happening? Is your
I'm feeling some warmth, like in the upper belly area, come up, and I'm feeling a little trembling in the throat.
Let's pause and be with that because baby girl also started whipping around.
She did.
And anyone listening, you can go to YouTube and watch the video. Camille has her sweetheart tied up right to her little body right now. So just see what it's like to let that do its thing and tell me what it does.
It was interesting. Like the trembling in the throat sort of moved up to my jaws, and there was like this relaxing or softening in the jaws.
Mm. Yeah, and let's just take a moment. This is good for all of you listening. When we're telling a story, even when we're safe, the body still remembers. There's remnants of it that get activated. So to kind of pause and let that activation unfurl and blossom like a cloud and then dissipate when it's ready and then move on is a way to tell a story without re-traumatizing the body.
Yes.
And it was profound again to see her kind of whipping around and making noises as you were talking about her experience.
Mhm.
Her body must be picking up on some of that too.
I think so.
Yeah. So whenever you want to proceed, feel free.
Yeah. So watching doctors and nurses resuscitate her probably was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life
Mm-hmm.
because it was one of the most activating moments I've ever experienced. And it was a moment when there was absolutely nothing for me to do. And they even asked me, they said, "Do you want to stay in the room or would you like to go to the waiting room?" And I checked in with my body and I felt like I had the capacity to stay and watch. And I felt like that would best serve me. I actually felt like I would become more activated and dysregulated in the not knowing. And I'd prefer just to be able to see whatever was going to happen in real time.
Yeah. So just to pause there again,
Mhm.
something called orienting. And when this is why when someone's going down the highway and there's an accident, everyone stops and looks.
Mhm.
It's because we're orienting toward possible threat. And that actually soothes the body to be able to see it, to not be
Mhm.
able to see it. And that's why COVID was so traumatic for so many people, because it was invisible. You couldn't see where it was coming from. But to be able to see where something's coming from, there it actually settles some part. So you noticed, okay, if I can orient toward the possible threat of something happening to her, my body can handle that more than being disoriented in the hallway, not knowing.
Yes, yes, exactly.
So how do you stay in your body while watching that?
So I sat in a chair as they were working on her, and I could feel in my body the activation coming up, and there was absolutely tears. And there reached a point where there was so much activation in my body, I chose to notice, okay, I'm sitting in the chair. I don't have to hold myself up.
Mm,
I can notice
mm.
my feet and my legs. All right, I can feel them. I can press them into the floor. And I take a couple of breaths into feeling my feet press into the floor, into feeling my body supported by the chair. And then I would turn my attention back to Khadija and what she was experiencing. And again, as I noticed maybe activation coming up in my body and reaching a certain point, I come back to just feeling held by the chair and knowing that my body in that moment could do anything it needed to, and the chair would hold me, or feeling my feet press into the ground. And I'm really fortunate. And I even said in, I think, some of the previous podcasts, things, I won't speak for everyone, but I feel like for me, things come for me when they're supposed to. Because I feel like I'm fairly certain without somatic practices, if I had stayed there and watched what was happening to her, or even if I had gone into the hallway, my body would have experienced overwhelm. I would have collapsed, fainted, I would have dissociated. But with these practices, I was able to stay embodied. I was able to release the charge that I could as it was coming up. And then I was able to notice where there wasn't charge in my body. And I was able to notice when I actually needed to take a break from attuning to her and just come back to me.
And that piece is so powerful to me because you and I have taught this to thousands of people at this point around, especially parents, around how self attunement actually serves the other because you're in your body, you're in your resourcing. It's like on like a more, I don't know, social level. It's why like using privilege helps people instead of feeling guilty or shame by it. It's the same
Yes.
difference, right?
Yes.
It's like
Absolutely.
whatever your situation is, if you can ground into that without attuning to the other's suffering, you actually become more useful.
Mhm.
And so that this is a prime example of how old is she in this moment? This
5 weeks.
so here she is, 5 weeks being resuscitated, possibly dying in front of your eyes, or actually kind of
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
And you're, instead of attuning to her potential death, you feel your own body, you come into your own chair, somatic selfishness, if you will, in a really
Mhm.
good way, like
Yeah.
self attune. And from that place, you get to be a conscious mother in the room with her.
Hmm.
So if she dies, you're present for it. If she lives, you're present for it.
Yes.
That's such an important piece of wisdom because, like I said, we've taught this to people, and it's hard to fathom it because we've overcoupled compassion and love with codependence.
Hmm.
Like compassion for you means I suffer with you. It
Yes.
means to suffer with, but that's not actually useful to anyone. In this case, what would that have done for anybody?
Exactly. Yeah. Even outside of that moment, throughout all of this work, there's just been this thing, this knowing in my body that the best way I can support her is to support myself as well. And to your point, it can sound really selfish, like particularly in that moment. What do you mean you're taking your attention off her? Your daughter is dying in front of your eyes, and you're noticing what's happening to you.
Mhm.
Yes, yes, I am,
Mhm.
so that I can support her.
So then what happened?
So they were able to resuscitate her. Like I said, she was hooked up to a heart bypass machine and a ventilator to allow her body to recuperate and gain some strength. And what was interesting is like immediately after she was initially stable, several doctors came up to me and said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe how calm you are."
Mm,
And I just said thank you because they were being nice and I wanted to be polite. But I was thinking, I'm not really calm. I'm just
mm,
embodied. There was
mm,
a lot of charge in my body. There was a lot going on. But I was also finding resourcing. I found resourcing in sitting in the chair. I didn't stand up for a long time. I was sitting down even after all this happened. Put a chair in the room. It's like I
Yeah.
don't have the capacity right now to stand up. The support of the chair, knowing that whatever my body needs, I can just let it happen, and the chair has me. That was supporting me. Checking in with my feet, pressing my feet into the ground. That was resourcing. So there was absolutely charge and stimulation in my body. And there were things that were there to help me hold that stimulation and charge.
How long, and I like the distinction between I wasn't calm, I was present, I
Mm-hmm.
was embodied. I wanted everyone
Yes.
to hear that because whenever we do public work or virtual work, I always say to everyone, okay, let's get settled into the body. And I don't mean relax.
Yes.
I mean, let's just get embodied because
Mm-hmm.
relax is kind of like oppressive to the body.
It is.
You must calm down. Like
Yes.
says who? There's a good reason why the body's anxious. Can we be present and embodied to the anxiety? Doing that appears calm to other people because
Mm-hmm.
you're not getting dysregulated. You're
Yes.
self-witnessing. There's a containment where you're not reacting around, to people around you or co-dysregulating. So in a lot of ways, you are creating a calm environment, even when your insides can be rattled because you're
Mm-hmm.
present to that rattle. The rattle isn't taking over and rattling everything around you.
Yes.
So like you're mothering the rattle in you.
Exactly. Another reason why this isn't bypassing. It'd be
That's right.
bypassing if I was saying like, oh, I should calm down. She's stable now. Don't make this a big deal, or it's not about you. But like I was mothering the
That's
rattling
right.
within me, just
That's
like I
right.
was mothering her.
That's right. And I wonder how long from that moment, if you can remember,
Mm-hmm.
how long did that rattle live in you? Was it like days of slowly unfurling? Was there a sudden moment where it dropped?
Yeah. So the first 4 days were probably the most difficult because she was still on the heart bypass machine and the ventilator. Um, and one of the things I noticed, particularly I think after the first 48 hours, like my body was still so exhausted. But I was like,
Hmm.
but I'm doing all the quote unquote right things. I'm pendulating. I haven't had any caffeine or sugar. I am making sure that I sleep, as much as I can. But there's so much activation in my body. But what's going on?
Hold
And
the
then
phone, everybody. Camille had no caffeine or sugar through all this. Now, come on.
yes,
High
and it was
five.
that.
High five, sweetie. That's
I will say that's another thing that supported me. Not to go off on a tangent, I will circle back. But the nutrition was incredibly supportive during this
amazing.
time. Again, if we think about that stop and go experience of
Mhm.
being in a medical space, a lot of times parents, I was in a children's hospital, they're using caffeine and sugar to ramp up their body when all of a sudden things are changing. All right, we're doing this procedure, we're going to this space. Or they're using bread, meats, and cheese to depress their system when, okay, we're just going to observe the kid for 4 or 5 days and see what happens. So I'm just a parent. I'm
Yeah.
supposed to sit here and not do anything. We're just waiting to see. But for me, I was really intentional about focusing on balancing food so that rather than chasing or following the flow of the medical plan, my body was just paced on its own. It was
Mhm.
refreshed. It was able to be present and aware rather than trying to keep up with the stop and go flow
Mhm.
of a lot of this. So yeah, and so I do think that helped me in that moment. If there had been caffeine and sugar in my body at that point, I can't even
Oh
imagine
yeah.
how much
Oh
charge and
yeah.
stimulation would have been in my body. Yeah.
But that's an important piece for people to hear as well, because 4 days of kind of sustained activation, like it's not really going anywhere. I'm doing everything right. We hear this a lot in the course when we get into week two. There's a group of people who kind of like immediately start feeling settled by day one of doing the diet. And then there's people who are like, I'm doing everything right. I have even more anxiety.
Yeah.
And this is that kind of body where a balancing diet, balancing foods that support the system, they don't depress or activate.
Hmm.
So if you have activation, they're just letting you be with the activation. They're creating capacity for the embodiment of those sensations, not trying to take away those sensations through force of
Yeah.
stimulation or depressing or, flavor, whatever it is. So you're there for 4 days. The food is keeping you embodied, which means you have to feel this. So it's not always convenient deep balancing foods. It's not always easy,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
But it's supporting your adrenals. What happens after the fourth day? What happened for your body?
Yeah. So to your point, I'm experiencing all this activation. I could have said, well, I can run to a restaurant, I can have a glass of wine, or I can eat some
Hmm.
food and just bring me down. But I was really curious as to, what's going on. I'm doing, again, quote unquote, all the right things. And as I was sitting with it and just sort of reflecting on it, I noticed what my body was doing. At this point, we're in day two. For the last 48 hours, my body had not just been attuning to the fact that Khadija might die, but what was really threatening to my body was that I was going to have to call my husband. I was going to have to
Mm.
tell my sons that Khadija is dead. And that was causing so much constriction and bracing and activation in my body. And so every time I heard a little bell go off, it wasn't that, oh, Khadijah's dead or going to die. I'm going to have to call Justin, my husband. I'm going to have to tell Malcolm and Jamal their sister is dead. And it was
Mm.
literally like just holding my breath for 48 hours,
Hmm.
waiting for that to happen.
And that was subconscious. You didn't realize that
Yes,
until
I
the
didn't realize that
sensation
until I
showed you
really
that.
sat with it, because I think for me, I was noticing that there really wasn't a lot of bracing in my body about her dying.
Yeah,
I could,
for you.
yeah, for me, like I
Yeah.
knew that, I could feel that. And because we talked about before my relationship with death, there's actually
Girl.
some softness, relief, and for
Yes.
me in the idea of death. So I was just
Me
like,
too.
so if that's not it, why is there all this bracing? And that's why I realized what it was. Oh, it's not her dying, it's me having to communicate that to other people,
Mm.
particularly her father and her brothers.
What was it like when you're so the sensations, which are doorways to the subconscious, we know this, the sensations led you to, oh, there's this subconscious orienting
Hmm.
toward this potential future threat of I have to call my family and tell them. And just for context, everybody, Camille was a plane ride away from her family. Weren't you in DC
Yeah, DC. Yeah.
and your family's in Virginia?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so she's by herself with Khadija in DC. Her husband and two boys are in Virginia.
Hmm.
So when you realized, oh, this is that part of my body orienting toward that, what happened when that became conscious?
Well, what was really interesting, just in the articulation of it,
Hmm.
there was like this opening in the body, like, oh, this is
Hmm.
what I'm doing. And then I can follow that opening by bringing myself back to the now.
Hmm.
Yes, in this moment, she's still in the heart bypass machine. And in this moment, she's still on the ventilator. But her heart is beating and she's breathing. I'm not having to make that phone call right now.
Mm.
And if I could just attune to that fact, I'm not having to make that phone call right now, there was immediately this settling and
Hmm.
opening and softening throughout the body.
And just to give people listening a real idea of this, I'm thinking for myself in situations when we're pendulating between the future fear, which is I have to call them, make that phone call, and the present moment, and it's not happening right now. Sometimes you have to do it like a dozen times an hour,
Oh,
where you
yeah.
just constantly bring yourself. So you just tell us about the
Yeah.
how chronic that is for you or
Yeah,
was for
no,
you.
I like to liken it to like riding a bike or walking on a tightrope. It's when
Yeah.
you feel your body leaning, you're just bringing it back to the center. And it
Mm.
doesn't mean that you're not going to lean again, but when you feel it leaning, you notice it, and then you just come back to center. So when I noticed that my body was starting to brace or activate, I just try to check in. Where is that coming from? Usually the idea that maybe I'll have to make this phone call. I acknowledge that, and then I just come back to realizing in this moment, I'm not having to make that phone call.
Mm, I love that. So enough. So you made it conscious. It was
Hmm.
for 4 days. It was subconsciously living in you. Probably way before that, but for those
Yeah.
4 days especially, really living in you. That
Hmm.
hypervigilance kept all this activation in your body, regardless of what you were eating. You felt activated.
Yes.
You made the unconscious conscious by following the sensation. It showed you, oh, my body's orienting toward calling them. You did some pendulation, and then was it like slowly you felt a softening? What happened to the charge then?
Yeah, it really was. It was just like slowly I felt a softening. And I've said this in some other episodes, like a knowing that, okay, I can be with that. Like
Yeah.
if I feel my body attuning to that future potential phone call, I know how to bring it back to the present. I know what it's doing. I know what my body's doing. It's preparing for a potential future threat. I appreciate you, body. And here's what we're experiencing right now.
Mm-hmm.
And by coming back to the present, one of the things that supports me is also noticing that by being present, I'm providing my body with the resourcing to handle that potential future threat if, in fact, it does end up happening,
That's right.
versus constantly bracing for it and then just being utterly exhausted. And then it happens, and then I have no capacity for it.
So once that happened, after those 4 days occurred, and then you were gradually pendulating back to the present, getting more settled, was it like easy breezy from that point on? Like what happened in the next couple of weeks?
No, I wouldn't say it was easy breezy. After day 4, she comes off of the heart bypass machine. She's still on a ventilator, so things are progressing. They're getting better, but she's still in critical condition, and she'd be in critical condition for another 4 weeks. So still every day it was touch and go. How is she responding to this medication? How is her heart beating? So it was still this back and forth. And one of the things that also was supporting me during this time was just noticing my capacity. What's my capacity? Because, up into the surgery, and when she went into cardiac arrest, everyone was saying, "Oh, you can't be up there by yourself. You need someone up there. You need," and I was like, "No, I'm actually fine. I'm doing good." And then there reached a point, day 4, where I called Justin, my husband, and said, "Yeah, I need you up here with me." She was coming off, she came off the heart bypass machine, but I also just realized I needed a bit of co-regulation, in-person co-regulation. And so then he came and joined me. And it was really just about being curious. And I can't even tell you what changed from day 4 to day 5. Some people would say, but she came off the heart bypass machine. Things were getting better. Shouldn't you have been more comfortable? I can't tell you why, but I know I woke up that morning. I was talking to Justin, and I said, "Yeah, it would help me to have you up here." Um, and he came.
How long was he there?
So when he got it was another 4 weeks.
So you were together there for 4 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And where were the boys? With your parents?
With the grandparents. Yeah.
Got it. So then you two what was that like? You've never had 4 weeks together without the boys. Like, what was that like?
Yeah, so that was another thing. So yes, our daughter is in the NICU, and it's all these things are touch and go. But that was one of the other things I was attuned to. Oh, we have space and time just for us two to be together. We have 24-hour daycare or childcare. We can take a moment just for us to be together. So that was one of the things that was really supportive. And it was also a chance for Justin to get to rest. He got to sleep. He's not having to watch a 5-year-old and 7-year-old boy who want to wrestle with him all the time. So he gets a chance just to be still and come back into himself as well. And so that was really a time. It was interesting because he even had a question. He's like, "I don't know what I'm going to do when I get up there. How can I help you?" And he has his own healing modalities. He knows a little bit about somatics, but not a lot. But the concept of co-regulation was really what I was looking for. Just him being in the room with me, gave my body a lot of support. And for him, he couldn't really conceive of how that was helping or what he was doing to support me. But it was incredibly supportive.
Right, he's thinking, I have to go do something to support you, but
exactly.
Just his body there will settle to your body. Yeah,
it did. Yeah.
So once she was no longer critical, like once she was taken off the machines, I remember you were finally able to give her a bath, and you were able to hold her. Like, what was that moment like after? Because I get curious somatically, the animal mother body, like wanting to nurture and hold and like, what was that like for you, just not to be able to do that, not to be able to touch her? What was that charge like, if there was one?
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely this longing, this wanting, and this frustration. Like, oh my God, there are just wires all over the place. I can't just hold my child. I'm one of those moms. Like, I co-sleep with my kids the first year. Like, we are just all up in each other. And I didn't have that, and so there was this longing of, and like I said, a frustration, just like, oh. And again, what I was able to pendulate to was the fact that a few days ago, her heart stopped. I didn't know if she was going to be alive. So in this moment, she's holding my finger. She wasn't holding my finger a few days ago. Or today, her eyes are open. Her eyes weren't open a few days ago. Or, she had experienced seizures during her cardiac arrest, and they continued for a few days afterwards. Oh, her seizures aren't happening anymore. So I could just allow myself to be with what was, how she was able to be present with me in a way that she wasn't able to be present with me just a few days ago.
So then the the wires are off, the tubes are out, she's off the machine, you're holding her, you're bathing her, you're nursing her. What was that like for your body? What did that feel
Yeah.
like?
Oh no, I loved it. So one of the first things I got to do, even before I could hold her, was I got to wash her hair, and I just loved it. And
Mm,
Justin thought it was ridiculous. It's like you're just washing her hair, but it just felt so good.
of
And I remember even
course.
Khadija, like I was looking at her, I was like, "You probably think I'm ridiculous." She just looked annoyed, but I was having a great time, like washing her hair, playing in her little curls, and really get just feeling that touch and allowing having the opportunity for me to touch her and caress her and just hold her, even though I'm not holding her even with my full arms, but like to hold her head, caress her head, take water and pour it over. Got
Mm,
to give her a sponge bath. So
mm,
that was one of the first things I got to do. And then I did get to hold her a few days after that. And that was it was an interesting experience because she was still hooked up to some IVs and machines, and there was a bit of frustration because I couldn't just pick her up. Like the nurses, there was literally like four people had to pick her up and put her in my arms, and if I needed
mm,
to adjust, I had to call someone. So there was that frustration, like, this isn't really holding my daughter.
mhm,
I can't move freely. I still have to have all these people around to help me. And then there was the part just that was just like, we're holding her.
mm,
We didn't know she was going to be here in this form or in this capacity, and we're holding her.
mhm. And so then you finally you're released, you get to go home. Well, how has it felt integrating back into the home after living in the hospital for 7 weeks?
Yeah, so it was interesting. The as you're being discharged, they kind of prep you, especially after you've been in the hospital for a while. They said, when you go home, you may have some questions. Don't hesitate to call us. All these things. I'm like, whatever. I can't wait to get home. This is amazing. So we get home, and we're here for a few hours, and we're feeling great. And then Justin looks at her. He's like, "Is she breathing hard?" I was like, "No, she's fine." Well, I don't know. Is she breathing hard? And then so it was just interesting to notice in my
Yeah,
body that
yeah.
as annoying as like those machines and the beeping and the monitors were, there was also the benefit of I could look at that machine and see, okay, this is what her heart rate is, this is what her
Mhm,
oxygen level is. But now I'm home alone with my husband, and we're looking like, do we call someone? Do we not? How do we know what to do? So it was just interesting to notice again, what do you gain? What do you lose?
mhm,
Uh, and just coming back into okay, let me really begin to witness her and observe her because again, one of the things I really liked about the doctors is yes, they're looking at all these charts, all these standard operating procedures, and then they fundamentally look at her. They look at how is she
yeah.
responding. So they at least the practitioners I'm working with, they recommend notice what is she doing. Does she seem in distress? Does she seem like she's having difficulty? And so that's what I just bring my body back to. Okay, let me
Mhm.
see how she's doing. Um, and further and further away that we've gotten from being in the hospital, the more and more settled I'm in being with her.
And how's little Chiquiti doing? Like, what did
She is
she?
doing well. So today she is 4 months old. So she is gaining weight. She is getting bigger by the day, and she will have to have a second open heart surgery, more than likely sometime later this year. And again, that goes back to the whole planning. We don't
Mhm,
know exactly when that's going to happen. So that's another thing I've been orienting and trying to prepare my body for. Um, and it's interesting because it's this balance between I really want to be present in the moment with her right now and just allow this to happen. And also knowing more than likely my body still has a lot of overcouplings as it relates to
mhm,
hospitals and
mhm,
surgery. And so I'm trying to slowly titrate into what could potentially come up in my body when I enter that hospital again, or
mhm.
the day she goes back into surgery, or while we're in recovery. So I've been experimenting with that a little bit.
And I'm assuming you're doing this, you're consciously pendulating still between here she is now compared to orienting toward the next surgery and what could go wrong.
Exactly, exactly. Because, like I said, I really like to notice what's happening right now, and from time to time, I'll allow myself just to sit with, okay, in a few months,
Mhm,
we're going to go back to the hospital. Not even like the procedure itself, just allowing
mhm,
myself to notice you're going to walk into the hospital. What comes up in your body as you think about going back into that hospital. And then I come back to now, well, we're not in the hospital right now. And so at some point, I'm going to slowly titrate my body into being with, okay, she's going into surgery or she's going to be in recovery, because that's when her cardiac arrest happened, not actually during the procedure, but during her recovery, just so that my body can begin to play with some of the overcouplings that I definitely think are have developed.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we have to close soon. We have so much more to talk about because I want to talk about for, future, just to pin it for the future, people listening, how much you learned as a somatic practitioner and teacher about medical trauma, about invasiveness that's inherent to
Yes.
medical trauma, boundary violations, how to honor her boundaries now because she's been so violated. And
Yeah.
when people hear me say that, we're not saying it negatively. It's like you have to violate the body to do medical procedures. You have
Yeah.
to put things through the skin. You have to put things into noses and mouths. And
Yeah.
that's just part of saving someone's life medically. But the body, the animal body, still counts that as a violation. So maybe like a real little crumb. What has been your awareness around that with her? How have you been renegotiating boundaries with her since then?
Yeah. So just a little crumb of so one, because she
We are
has
nerds.
experience.
We
Yeah.
are somatic nerds. I'm like seeing
Somatic
like
nerve.
your face is like lighting up about this crumb, and I'm feeling like I'm gonna hear something really. I'm like, wait, this is where it is. Two neurodivergent Virgos nerding over somatics. That's
Okay.
what we do all day long.
Gosh.
Okay,
Gotta love
sorry.
America.
Tangent.
Um, so because she has experienced so many boundary violations and she's already been under anesthesia at a very young age, one of the things that I am doing with her is to help her really reestablish boundaries. So I like to put my hands on her feet and allow her to kick away from me. Or if I'm approaching her and she swats her hand, I allow her to swat
Mm,
me away. Or if I'm changing her diaper, I do it actually pretty slowly. Like I kind of allow her to orient to me. I might put my hands up for a while, or I'll wait instead. If she's kind of like this, I'll wait until she releases or relaxes and softens, and then I'll change her diaper. So doing little things like that to let her know establishing your boundaries isn't a bad thing. And there are certain cases where people will listen to you when you
mm.
establish your boundaries.
And that's important because she went through weeks of not having any
Yes.
say in that. And these traumas, like the trauma Khadija experienced, like her body remembers this even though she won't remember it.
Mhm.
These are pre-verbal, pre-conceptual, if you will, traumas that happen to many of our bodies early, the first few months of life, that we wouldn't even ever regard as traumas because we don't remember them.
Yeah.
But the way you're renegotiating that with her is simple as putting your hands up, and when she swats you, letting her swat you away. It tells her body, oh, I'm safe. I'm in a place where I'm being responded to. I have some agency. And it lets that agency unfurl, especially because at her age, she could barely even move. There's no crawling even that could happen.
Yeah.
So fight or flight was very hard to even access at that age, and the way her body was weakened and the way she was anesthetized, and there's so many parts of it. So we'll have to do a whole episode on medical trauma and renegotiating
Yeah.
boundaries, because I know a lot of people listening, when they hear us say this right now, are going to be like, yes, please. I didn't even know this was a thing. Like, I want to learn. I want to learn how to do this. And Camille and I teach this in a parenting group that we do, a slow parenting group. By the time everyone hears this, we'll be doing it already. But maybe in 2024, we'll do another one. We'll have to see. But thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you for being you and for being in my life and being a good friend and being a good colleague, and just amazing to see, like you said, your belief things come to you when you need them. It's amazing to think when I met you, just when you took the course and then how you joined our team and really got serious about somatics, that in a way it was preparing you for this moment that could have completely ruined your life and didn't.
Yes. Yeah. No, I say without any hesitation or doubt that had this happened at another point in my life, I would have been completely overwhelmed.
Hmm.
Completely.
Oh my gosh, to say the least.
Mm.
I'm so proud of you, and I'm so proud of Khadija, and we'll be here for you for the next one. We'll navigate it together. Okay.
Okay. Thank
Thank you,
you.
love.
Ooh.
That's the end of today's episode. Now let's take a moment to notice where we feel the episode in our bodies. Close your eyes. Take a breath. And let whatever wants to come up, come up. And remember, those sensations hold the wisdom that we're looking for. If you want to go deeper, visit holisticlifenavigation.com.